Here's a tough pill to swallow, but if I want to talk honestly about reparations for African Americans, I have to start with this. The term African American as it's used today just can't legally support reparations on its own. Why? Well, because African American is a broad cultural identity. It isn't tied to a single traceable historical injury. Think about who falls under that label. You've got descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, Afro-Indigenous people whose tribal identities were erased, folks whose ancestors were enslaved in the Caribbean or Latin America, recent immigrants from Africa, and mixed lineage individuals whose records have been reclassified over generations. But here's the catch. Only one group carries the specific legal injury that would be the basis for reparations in the United States: direct descendants of U.S. slavery. Courts can't hand out reparations to a group whose ancestry includes people who weren't harmed by that particular injustice. Historically, African American wasn't even a thing during slavery or in the years right after. Those records said Negro, colored, mulatto, or freedman, not African American. That's why the term doesn't work for reparations today. It's just too broad, too modern, and it can't separate injured lineages from non-injured ones. If reparations are going to work in the U.S., the government needs a group that's specific, historically, continuous, and directly tied to the original harm. But here's the challenge. None of the big labels we use right now fit that bill. American is a nationality. It doesn't say anything about heritage. Black is a racial category invented by the state, and it mixes together people with totally different histories: descendants of U.S. slavery, Afro-Indigenous people, Caribbean immigrants, African immigrants, and more. And African American is a cultural identity that came about long after the harm was done. It doesn't tell you if someone descends from U.S. chattel slavery, Caribbean slavery, erased indigenous lineages, or recent immigrants. The law is pretty clear on what's needed for reparations: a clearly defined harmed class, historical continuity, descendant verification, and a direct line from harm to present-day impact. None of the current labels meet all those requirements. That's why there's a growing argument for a new collective identity that recognizes layered ancestry and specific historical injuries, not to replace culture or erase anyone's identity, but to give a name to the lineages America erased, reclassified, and fractured on paper, and to give those lineages a legally recognized way to claim repair. Now let me throw out a big what if. What if Black Americans were formally classified as indigenous? Would that change the reparations conversation? Honestly, it would flip the entire legal landscape on its head. Here's how. Reparations wouldn't just be about labor stolen during slavery. They'd become about dispossessed indigenous nations. If Black Americans are recognized as pre-Columbian inhabitants, reclassified tribes, or erased indigenous lineages, the claims go from slavery-based to land-based. And land claims, those are way more powerful. Indigenous groups have established legal pathways. They have treaties, sovereignty, land rights, and the ability to sue the U.S. government as nations, not just as individuals. That opens treaty claims, territorial claims, federal compensation, the right to cultural restoration, even UN-level human rights claims. It also reframes Black America as a colonized people, not just an oppressed minority. Colonization brings international laws and reparations standards into play, much stronger than civil rights-based requests. Plus, it challenges the old narrative that every Black American's ancestors arrived on slave ships. If even a fraction were already here, then the U.S. enslaved its own indigenous population and erased their status, a legal crime comparable to ethnic cleansing. So yes, if Black Americans were recognized as indigenous, it would supercharge reparations claims. And that's exactly why getting the definition, getting the identity, right, is so important.